Hi, this is Dr. P to talk about life lessons learned from designing games. And this is aimed principally at aspiring designers, but might also be of interest to teachers. Somebody named Mike Petty put a question on a couple of board game design forums asking about important lessons learned from designing games. The source of his interest is in using games and game design in the classroom. The URL for the full results are here. Now, when I taught college classes, my department chair used to say I always taught Life 101, whatever else the class was about. In other words, I was interested in making the students better people and enabling them to have a better life. And so, given that attitude, it's not surprising I decided to participate. I didn't take very long to think about it, but I came up with the following. I said, not sure I learned anything in particular because I've been doing it since I was a young teen, but in game design, certainly you could teach the following. Most people don't like the same things you like, or act the way you act, or think the way you think. Creativity doesn't just happen, you have to work at it. And the third one, actions are far more important than intentions. Well, I'm going to take the last one first. Actions are far more important than intentions. There seems to be a trend among the younger generation to regard intentions as just as important as actions. Well, that doesn't work in the real world. Apparently now it works in schools, but it doesn't work in the real world, especially the world of game design. There's so many wannabe designers who talk about what they're going to do, not what they have done. And of course nobody cares, quite rightly, because people in the game business care about what you do and what you have done, not what you intend or intended to do. Actions are what count. And of course, this is true generally in life and school. And I have a few more quotes here. Remember, people will judge you by your actions, not your intentions. You may have a heart of gold, but so does a hard-boiled egg. Another one, talk is cheap. Intentions are talk. And the third, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Yet, and remember, I was a college teacher, and sometimes occasionally high school kids taking college classes, I heard so many young people try to excuse their inaction with their intention. It didn't work with me, and it doesn't work in the real world. It doesn't work in game design, though it might work occasionally for Kickstarter. Another lesson, creativity doesn't just happen, you have to work at it. There's so many people who think that creativity is just a personality trait or just an accident, something that some people do and some people don't. It's certainly true that some people may be more creative than others, or maybe just luckier. But much of creativity comes from intention followed by action. That word action again. A quote from Leonard Bernstein, "Inspiration is wonderful when it happens, but the writer must develop an approach for the rest of the time. The wait is too long." And famous American writer Jack London, "You can't wait for inspiration, you have to go after it with a club." You have to work at being creative. And if you don't work at it, you'll stop being creative. When I used to write a lot of articles back in the 1980s, early 1980s, for White Dwarf and Dungeon Magazine and other magazines, I had a 3x5 card index box full of ideas for articles. Of course, this is before computers, before personal computers. And when I stopped writing those articles, I stopped getting ideas. I stopped adding to those lists. Nowadays, I'm doing a lot of screencasts like this one, and I use a program called InfoSelect to keep track of ideas, and I get ideas for new screencasts just about every day because I'm working at it. I'm keeping my mind tuned in on that possibility. Now you also have to recognize in life and in school that sooner or later you'll have to sort your ideas out because most of them will be worthless, or at least not worth much. And if you design games, you'll figure that out pretty quickly if you're a real game designer and not a dilettante who just works on one game at a time. The third lesson: most people don't like the same things you like, or act the way you act, or think the way you think. My experience is that novice designers tend to assume that everyone likes the same things in games that they do. And there are certainly occasions when people do this and get lucky, like the guys who made Doom. They had certain preferences, and it turned out there were an awful lot of people with those same preferences at that time. But you can't rely on that, especially nowadays when there are thousands and thousands of games. Think about it. It's entirely unlikely that other people think the way that you do and like the same things you do, any more than everyone likes the same food or the same movies or even the same hobbies that you do. So you cannot expect people to react to a game just as you do. You have to figure out who your target audience is and focus on them. In life and in school, some people aren't even trying to win the game, so to speak. They have other things in mind. They don't have typical goals in life. Lots of people have a goal of getting married and having children and so forth and owning a house. Not everybody is interested in that. And life is in many respects a process of negotiation. When you negotiate with somebody, you need to try to understand what their goals are. If you assume their goals are such and such and they're in fact something else, your negotiation isn't going to work out. So the point here is you have to figure out what other people want and not assume they want the same things you want. Also, I've observed that younger people especially, when they find somebody who doesn't like the same things they like, become defensive and try to convince the other person that they should like what that person likes. It's not worth it. It's not an attack on your preferences if somebody else doesn't like them. It's not a validation of your preferences if other people do like them. If you don't have the courage of your own convictions, you've got problems. And yet we seem to have an awful lot of younger people who have that problem. Well, if they thought about how this works in games, they might realize why they shouldn't expect everybody to like the same things they do. Now I'm going to add a fourth lesson that I thought of while I was making this screencast. Ideas are cheap though necessary. What counts much more is execution. There are a great many people who confuse game design and success in the world in general with getting ideas. Designing games, you just get a few ideas. That's not at all what game design is. Virtually everyone has ideas, the same way virtually everyone has fingers. It's what you do with those ideas or those fingers that really counts. No one, in games anyway, is going to pay you for an idea. They want an actual product. And that's the way it is in most, though not all, walks of life. You need to execute your ideas. That is to say, you need to make a product or make something out of those ideas if you want to do well. I think it's worth looking at Mike Petty's results for other good life lessons from game design, but I have to say that many of them are very focused as opposed to mine, which are quite broad. Thanks for listening.